right now and you haven't been, you won't be hearing this, but the option should appear soon. I'm going to go over some housekeeping items here before the presentation starts. Bear with us. The presentation takes about 25 minutes. During the presentation, you're able to engage with us. There's 3 ways using Zoom to engage to the presenters and the panelists. The first option is the best option, and that is to use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. If you mouse over the bottom of your screen, you should have a Q&A button. Once you click on that, you'll be able to type a question in there, which will be recorded. Staff can either choose to answer it during the presentation, not myself, as I'll be talking, or we can answer it at the end of the presentation. Because this is on YouTube and I want to give everyone a fair option to see all the questions, I'll be reading out the questions unless they're inappropriate for everyone to be able to hear them. The other option to engage tonight, you can raise your hand. I can see Mr. Bill has his hand up already. Thank you for your eagerness. We'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. There's a slide that says questions. That's the cue to start raising your hands. I will take you in order and give you the opportunity to join us over Zoom. You can speak or be seen on video, and that will be recorded on YouTube, so just be aware. The third way to talk is to use the chat feature. This is the least preferred option, as it can get quite busy, and there's a good chance if we're all using the chat feature that we won't see the questions. So preferably if you have something to type, please use the question and answer feature. If you'd like to join in at the end with a verbal question, use your hand raise option. And otherwise, enjoy the presentation. I understand that some of this information takes time to process. And for that reason, we have an email address posted at the end of the presentation that you can send us an email to. These presentations are recorded on YouTube for you to see again. And we'll be posting PDFs of the PowerPoint slides on the website when we get an opportunity. The intention originally was to post those before the presentation. I apologize. I know some of you and I had talked previously, and that was the plan. I've not been able to get that done in time. Unexpected workload, and it's very busy. I see someone says you can't see me. If you click on the screen, it's a bit of a confusing setup I'm using here. I have one computer sharing my PowerPoint. I have my cell phone taped to the computer with duct tape that is using the camera, and the microphone is done through the boardroom system to allow us to record everything on YouTube. So it's a little bit complicated, and I'm sorry if you don't get my screen up when it's me talking. I don't think you're missing much, but I will, maybe if I do this, there I am. Hopefully you can see me. Unfortunately for yourselves, I would say. Okay, now that you can see me, I'm going to share my screen, and we get started on this presentation. Again, bear with me if I click through the wrong things. It's only my 10th presentation this month. Okay. So it should be up. I see the presentation. Hopefully you can see it. Today we're talking about Square Bay wastewater treatment, and specifically what is now a fall 2020 capital funding update. At this point, microphone's not quite loud enough. Thank you for the input. I'll bring it a bit closer to my mouth. Is that better? Hopefully the volume is a little bit better. At this point, if I talk much louder, I get feedback in the loop, so this is the best I can do for volume. So just a little bit of a primer here. This is the Square Bay wastewater service area. The map on the screen outlined in blue. Every property inside of that is a participant in the wastewater service. And you can see on the map your collection system, and you have a pump station and a treatment plant and an outfall. That is the system that we're talking about today. If you're not within this area, you're welcome to listen to this presentation. You're welcome to ask questions, but please keep the questions to the Square Bay wastewater service area. Today we're going to talk about a few things. I'll do a quick summary of the previous review. I know that some of you might not have been able to join us in person, and so I'll just go over broadly what we talked about last time and what we've done. I'll give you an update on what we've changed and where we're at now with the capital funding projections. We'll talk about what's coming up next, and then we'll take questions at the end. Again, I expect this to take about 20 to 25 minutes before we're able to take questions. So previously, we started a wastewater service review in early 2019. We went through on a high-level basis of all the wastewater services that were offered in the Sunshine Coast Regional District. After that, we made service-specific asset management plans. These were for each of the 15 wastewater service areas. We collected all the information in one place and published that online for both staff and residents to have an understanding, a shared understanding of what we're talking about. We went out to the public in the winter of 2019-2020, and we engaged with the public to share what we found and to gather some feedback from the residents. In order to help understand the information we were displaying and talking about, we prepared some fact sheets. And then we went to the board with a budget revision that reflected the new data and aligned with resident feedback. Rate adjustment was proposed and was approved by the board in 2020. Some of the key findings from this service review were that existing revenue is unsustainable, obviously. Operations budgets were found to be often greater than the revenues generated from user fees, and because of that, contributions to reserve funds were frequently deferred. We found that the ratio of capital expenditures, the capital expenditures were not planned for, and the ratio of capital reserves to future capital expenditures was too low. If you were with us last winter, you probably saw this diagram, but this is just a recap of the previous funding model that we operated our wastewater services under. We collected frontage fees from every parcel in the service area, and we collected user fees from every parcel that was connected to the service. So if you had an empty lot, you would just be charged a frontage fee, but every house with a lot would be charged both. All of that revenue was collected into the operating budget, which was then used to fund the annual expenditures of operating. It was used to contribute to the capital and the operating reserves. It's a little bit of a convoluted path, so we thought that's something that we should improve upon. And coming out of the service review, we decoupled user fees and frontage fees so that user fee revenue only funds operations and maintenance expenses, and frontage fees only fund capital expenses. We find this to be a more transparent and easily to understand system. We conducted an extensive review of operation and maintenance requirements, including an audit of all operation and maintenance activities. We revised the operation and maintenance budgets to ensure that adequate funding was available every year for the activities we anticipated. And we established operation and maintenance reserve targets to make sure that every system had a minimum amount of money in reserves for the proverbial rainy day when it was required. This process is an annual process, and it'll continue to be reviewed annually to make sure we're not undershooting or overshooting what our targets are. And finally, we developed a capital funding model to help us plan for future capital expenses, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, that diagram I showed previously now looks like this. Quite simple. User fees fund operations and maintenance budget and contribute to operations and maintenance revenue. And separately, frontage fees fund capital expenditures and contribute to the capital reserve. Common question that I've received over the last year approximately is, why do we need an operating reserve? Well, that question can be answered because I think we can all agree that unforeseen repairs can exceed an annual operating budget. Anyone that's owned a car or a house can probably relate to that. But in our scenario, we're not able to borrow for operational expenses. So we need to have the money on hand to make sure that we can maintain the service. Now, an important thing to note is that reserves, whether it's operating or capital, can only be withdrawn and used for your service area. So it can't be withdrawn and used for another local service area or one anywhere else on the coast. Any monies that are in these reserves are only used for the service area from which they were sourced from. So here's the impact from last year's review. Square Bay wastewater operation and maintenance budget changed 59%. And we saw the user fee increase $88.69 last year. We introduced a debt payment associated with the construction of the new treatment plant that was $217.42 a year. And we removed the frontage fee for the year as one of our target feedback last year during the budget proposals was that we didn't want to have too many additives in one year. The debt payment is associated with capital projects and will be captured by the frontage fees anyways. So the total increase for Square Bay was $204.11 from the year previous. During our process of reviewing the capital funding model this year, we took into account a lot of the feedback we received. One of the first things we heard was that we were being too conservative. I think that can be a sentiment that many of you had. So we looked where we could. We analyzed historical SCRD contract data. We reduced engineering allowances by 3%. We reduced our contingency allowance by 15%. We also heard that there was more tolerance for debt from the residents than maybe we had anticipated. So where possible, we considered financing larger portions of the projects. And one of the main complaints was that the uncertainty around rates was causing a lot of hardship and stress on people. And so going forward, we're looking to propose a 5-year rate structure, and this would provide some, at least some certainty about what's coming up next. And it also allows, staff to have a concrete idea of what financial projections they're going to be dealing with. We also updated the savings rates and borrowing rates to match the current rates. And we introduced variable borrowing rates based on the anticipated term of the loan. So if we could do a 10-year loan, we would have a different rate than if we anticipated a 30-year loan. There are several factors which dictate the length of the loan that's available. Generally, for municipal infrastructure, the loan is not allowed to be longer than half the anticipated life of the infrastructure. Another contentious issue that we had last year was the construction cost index we used. We used a flat rate, I believe, of 4.5% previously. It might have been 5%. So I apologize for my memory. In its place, we've introduced a variable construction cost index. This was sourced by estimating company RS Means, and they have a regional cost index for the last 70 years for BC, particularly Vancouver. And these were the rates we found. So if a project is anticipated in the next 10 years, we're able to use a lower rate than one farther out. This is something we're continuing to look at, but all the information we find, has to be defensible. And this is so far the only data we've seen on this, as low as we can get it so far. So a few confining factors. I've received a lot of emails from Square Bay residents, and I really appreciate the feedback and the engagement. I think it's great that we're all involved here. I want everyone to be understanding of the constraints that we're working within. So one of the big ones is that we're working under provincial legislation. Regional districts operate under rules that are set by the provincial government. And one of those rules is that local service areas within regional districts can be funded only by participants. I get a lot of emails that say, why can't these costs be shared across the regional district? Why do we have to pay for them? Well, that's unfortunately the law. So that is the answer to that question. I don't need to email everyone back to answer that, I think. And in your situation, there's 93 parcels, so your costs are shared by a small number of people. Obviously, we can appreciate that all infrastructure degrades over time. We all drive up and down Highway 101. You get reduced performance and higher maintenance costs over time. And finally, infrastructure costs inflate over time, and they inflate faster than the consumer price index. That's something we have to be aware of and we have to plan for. We can't plan to save the same amount of money to replace the plant we built last year in 50 years because it's going to cost significantly more. So just a broad overview of the method we've used so we can all be on the same page again. When we're making these capital funding plans, we develop a timeline of the anticipated replacement for each component in the wastewater system using the estimated useful life of the infrastructure. The estimated useful life is determined using engineering estimates, best practices, and any data we have locally and within our partner municipalities and regional districts across the province. Where possible, we use the most recent replacement cost estimates. The value in this is we reduce the potential for overinflation. If we have a similar component installed recently, we can use a newer estimate to update our values. We inflate to the future value using the construction cost indices I showed previously. And we include debt financing costs where we anticipate accruing debt to pay for projects. On the flip side of the ledger, where we do anticipate a reserve to be built up, we will apply the anticipated amount of interest we would accrue over that time. I would like to highlight that we've put effort into using the most recent replacement cost estimates. I think that's an important factor, and we'll continue to do that. I'd also like to remind everyone, if you forget from last year, there's 3 main components within your wastewater system, and that will have a fairly long lifespan. Your treatment plant is about a 50-year life, and I think we're almost on 50 years exactly since the previous one was installed in 1970. Disposal system has about a 40-year life. This is incorrect. I should have put for your system, we have an outfall, and we generally anticipate those to last about 80 years. So that's about double as much for the ones that's in the ground. Your collection system, we anticipate to last about 80 years. For Square Bay, there are some other minor components such as force mains, pumps, because we have not the ability to just have gravity-fed mains. So there are some other minor components which we consider, and they have shorter lifespans. So with that in mind, I want to help everyone understand why we've chosen 50 years as the model horizon when we make these financial projections. What we have here on the screen is the next 30 years of anticipated capital expenditures for Square Bay, and it doesn't look like there's very much. We end up having a set of outfall anchors that need to be repaired or replaced. We have a phase 1 of the collection system. There is 2 different sets of collection systems in Square Bay, and we phased each of them into 3 phases to anticipate, replacing them in line instead of one lump sum item. We have the generator and sand filter coming up as well. And then at the end of the 30-year term, we're looking at replacing the UV disinfection equipment and the blowers within the treatment plant. Now, if we look at our reserve balance, if we continue on at a historical rate increase over the amount of time that the Sunshine Coast Regional District has been in charge of the Square Bay wastewater service, there's been a 22-cent year in average increase. That's not a linear increase. I think there is one rate increase. So if we continue on that rate, we can expect our reserve balance to build as you see on the bottom of your screen there. It looks like it might be part of the bottom axis, but that somewhat thicker gray line is the reserve balance over the next 30 years. It looks like it's able to accommodate the first item, and then as we get into the next 2 items, we don't have enough money, so we're going to end up borrowing here to do this infrastructure. And what that does, if we borrow, what I put on the screen now is the yellow line, and that's the annual fee that we'll see for the next 30 years. My mouse is making some noise, apologize. So we'll get a small bump during the first infrastructure replacement there. And then when we get up to these 2, we end up going from $264 a year to $702, and from $703 to $807. So that's just in the next 30 years. We can see that the current rate is not sustainable. You have this fee increase here and here that are related to the loan payments associated with the insufficient reserve funds to pay for the infrastructure. So if we back that picture up to 50 years, we introduce ocean outfall, collection system phase 2, security fence, pretty small contributing factor in that one. Not very good animation. We have a force main and a lift station. We have another phase of the collection system. And then we come up to the treatment plant in 2070. So when we look at that same reserve balance and fee, what's going to happen to that is we just see it step up, and into the greater than $4,000 range. I didn't want to get my scale changing all the time, so I didn't bother showing how high it goes. I think it gets up to about $6,000 here. And that would just be driven entirely by debt. There would be no opportunity, as you can see on the bottom of the screen there, that gray line maintains fairly flat profile, and we don't build much reserve between these items. So this is not what we consider a financially sustainable plan. This is a plan that is driven by debt, and we have very little control over the rates as we are just falling from one debt to the next. There's also a bunch of financial policies that the SCRD has regarding the amount of debt it can carry and the way it considers rates to be equitable over time. So this does not satisfy the SCRD's financial policy for a financial sustainability plan. Now we continue backing out, and Square Bay has one more item in the 75-year range, but I believe that's another part of your collection system. We want to keep the range to what's a reasonable range. I think similar to Goldilocks, we have too cold, too hot, and 50 years is just right. So now we're going to show the plans. We did a lot of work on these plans over the last 6 months. Probably with the 15 systems, we've been doing this almost nonstop. What I'm going to show today is, again, a range of plans, but I'm not going to show all of them just to save time. So this would be the plan that I feel is the most financially sustainable as far as maintaining a reserve balance and being equitable to everyone. What we think is important is a flat rate, a rate that is consistent but increases in line with what we call a CPI or Consumer Price Index, inflation you might know it as. 2% is generally the average price over the last little while. So this plan increases $200 a year from $217 today, which is, you may remember, your debt payment for the treatment plant that was built last year. And it increases to $1,017 over the next 5 years, and then increases at 2% for the remainder of the 50 years. And what this plan does is, I've put on the screen now in the blue line, that's your reserve balance over the next 50 years. You can see that we were able to accommodate almost everything, and we get into this very last treatment plant here in 2070, and we have a low reserve balance, but we do have a high enough user fee that we anticipate the debt payment associated with that would be not causing a massive spike at this point. So some people would argue that $200 a year is a little bit too aggressive, and we took that into consideration. So we looked at a less aggressive approach, and we did a $100 a year increase for a longer time. So we go from $217 this year to $1,217 in 2030, and then from there a 2% annual increase. This would be what we call proposed plan 2 for Square Bay. We're not super creative with our names. And you can see here, we're not able to accumulate enough reserve for the future expenditures, and I think we're not seeing a spike here because this is the end of the study. So when we move forward a year, we'll see that there's likely a spike here associated with these two debts stacking back to back. This plan, you know, I've heard a lot about uncertainty in our estimates, and I appreciate it's hard to estimate 50 years in the future. The problem that I see with this plan is we do have two items back to back with large debt, and so there is a potential this could cause a spike. But for the next 50 years, it is fairly acceptable. It's equitable to most residents in that it has a increase that matches CPI. You know, we enter situations where we, you know, potentially could borrow money, but it doesn't really account for all the costs that are associated over the next 50 years. Then this would be an even less aggressive increase. I did this for the same amount of time. We did a model where we continued $50 increase for the entire period, but that is not, that's greater than 2% a year. So it's not really equitable for every resident, future residents particularly. And what we can see here at the end of the plan, because there are no reserves, we can see a large increase in the user fees associated with the debt here. And again, this spikes up off the screen, and it's getting to about $5,500. This plan is not ideal. It definitely it sets us in a situation in the future where there won't be enough money to pay for the infrastructure we need to replace. So that gives you an idea of like the range. I like to call it, it's called bracketing. You can see the good, the bad, and the middle. What we have on the screen now is a comparison of those plans and the historical rate increases. You can see that although the first plan, proposed plan 1, is a bit more aggressive in the near term, it is actually one of the cheaper plans. Well, it's cheaper than plan 2 across the rest of the span. And then plan 3, or we call it the alternative plan, it stays low but has a massive spike. And then historical, if we maintain what we've been doing, we are just driven by debt the whole time. So we're looking to do a 5-year rate structure, again, to give residents and staff certainty about all these. The thought at this time would be that every year we tack on the final year of the 5-year plan, and we know where we're at for the next 5 years. It's important to note, we're talking about a 50-year plan, but we are asking for consideration of the next 5 years. So this is the portion of the plan we're looking at. And this is the breakdown specifics of financials for those 3 plans. What you can see is your user fee is increasing for the next 2 years. And the reason there is an increase in the user fee is $739.87 is what we think is a sustainable user fee. We have a pretty healthy operating reserve at Square Bay right now. I believe it's in the $40,000 to $60,000, somewhere in that range. And so we're using some of that reserve to offset the increase in user fees on residents. Because it's a new plant, we also appreciate that we could be wrong on what we anticipate maintenance requirements to be. And this allows us more flexibility to dial it in as we get to know the treatment plant over the next couple of years. In 2020, we have a consideration of a debt payment. And beyond that, you'll see there is none. What has actually happened is I've rolled that into the frontage fees subsequent to 2020. So the debt that's associated with the plant that was constructed last year is included in these frontage fees. And you can see the totals there. I believe my math is right. I did it in Excel. So let's blame Excel if there's anything wrong here tonight. So I'm going to have a little poll come up here in a second, and I want everyone to just let me know what is their preferred option here. This is not a bind-in poll. This doesn't hold the directors to vote what your opinion is, but it gives them some feedback that we might be able to receive in person a little bit more easily. This is just trying to leverage as many tools as we have in Zoom to collect as much feedback from the residents as we can. Before I get into the poll, I want to address that there's a lot of criticism about the construction cost index, and while I appreciate it's hard to predict 50 years in the future, and it's definitely hard to fathom the increases that the inflationary rates result in. I want to compare what would be an optimistic 3.5% long-term construction cost inflex. So this is the same as plan number 1, but in this scenario, the only thing that's changed is the last 4 large items here that were not captured in the 30-year plan. These all have a 3.5% construction cost index, so they're much reduced. And I'm going to flash back and forth between 2 slides here. This is the original. You can see this would be under the construction cost index that we have a developed and a defensible source for, and this is the optimistic one. And nothing in the rate changes over the next 50 years, but the reserve balance in the end does. I'm going to flash back between those again. So this is under the 4.6% or 4.4% for the longer term, and this is 3.5%. So plan 1, even under a 3.5% construction cost index, is not overly aggressive, and in my opinion, it's this would still be an appropriate financing model for this eventuality if this was the result, but it also allows us to be able to accommodate what we're seeing as far as the data suggests over the next 50 years. So let me see if I can get this poll up. I'm going to launch a poll here. It's going to ask you if you prefer Plan 1, Plan 2, or Plan 3. I believe Plan 3 was the alternative plan. Let me know. I'm going to leave this up for 2 minutes while I go fill up my glass of water so I'm fully able to answer questions. But about half of us have voiced our opinion in this poll. I'm going to leave it up for 1 more minute, and then we'll end it, and I'll share the results with everyone so we can see where we're looking. Okay, we've had 2 minutes here to click on the poll. I'm not 100% familiar with Zoom, so I can appreciate that maybe some people haven't been able to find it. If you do want to voice your opinion, you're welcome to send us an email. So don't stress if I close this before you get an opportunity. So here are the results of the plan of the poll. You can see it was split pretty evenly, with the larger portion choosing Plan 2 as their preferred option. But there you go. This will be passed on to the board when we do our feedback. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for participating in that part of this show. Moving forward, I'm just going to talk about what's coming up. We have to finalize this capital funding model. We will cross the T's and dot the I's and make sure that we haven't made any gross mistakes. Do a final review before we present it to the board. We'll continue to pursue grant opportunities for future work. Square Bay has been the recipient of a generous grant, and whether it's for your system or for any other system, we are looking for any opportunity to have these costs shared and reduce the impact on the residents. We're going to present the 5-year rate structure to the board for consideration. This, obviously gives some near-term rate certainty. And then on an annual basis, we review the operations and maintenance budget and refine the projection of maintenance costs to ensure we have an operating reserve that is appropriate for the service. And I just want to conclude tonight's conversation by saying, obviously the current rates are not financially sustainable. I think we can all appreciate there are multiple ways to finance 50 years of capital expenditures, and that by continuing to have an annual review process and soliciting feedback and engaging with the residents, we'll maintain up-to-date information and make sure we're on the right path for this. So if you have any questions, I direct you to the website, which I'm sure you've all found, www.scrd.ca/Square Bay, or to the SCRD Wastewater website. And if you'd like some answers directly from us, you're welcome to send us an email at info@scrd.ca I've been replying to a few emails lately, and I know some of you in the audience have received them. So continue. I will try to find time to respond to these emails. I'll leave this up on the screen just for a few more minutes in case anyone on YouTube is watching and they want to write these down. And then I'm going to take this down and we can go on to questions. So I see we already have 3 hands raised and a few questions in the audience. When you write a question in the question and answer, I will be reading them out loud, like I said. So if I don't respond via text, just keep your ears open and we'll be trying to get to them there. Oh, there I am. Okay. Okay, so we have 3 written questions, and I'll get to those quickly here. We have one asking, hello, I am paying for my system right now, and you want me to pay for the next one too. If you reside in the service for the next 50 years, you will be contributing to the next system, correct? The next question was, any ideas about climate change like rise in sea levels? I think you're totally out of reality for 50 years. Yeah, fair question. I think the latest projections for sea level rise would be 2.5 meters. And that would be a decision that when we have an engineer come in and provide their professional opinion, they would weigh that, I'm sure. The SCRD has requirements on flood construction level. We can go over that process at another time. It's not really related to this directly, but it's considered, I'm sure, by the engineers. And hello, Peter. Good to see you tonight. Roughly what percentage of future costs have you assumed in your various models will be funded by frontage rate increases? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. We can go back to the graph if you'd like. Let me see if I can do this real quick. Nope, that wasn't the one. Depending on the model, and depending on the infrastructure, there are different amounts we anticipate to be covered entirely by frontage fees and reserve balances, and then debt would be assumed later. Now, one of the problems, I'm just going to quickly share the screen so you can see what I am talking about. So I'm sure this is, I think this is what we're talking about, Peter. You're asking what percentage of infrastructure will be funded by frontage fees. So as you can see, the early construction over the next 40 years or so is funded 100%. And then we get into a situation where we borrow money here and here for this infrastructure. And as we illustrated, this is a plan where plan number 2, we borrow for the first big one, we borrow more for the next one, and then we borrow and borrow entirely for these. And what happens is you end up having an increase in your rate that's related to the debt. So if we stack too much debt, we never start accumulating a reserve, and then we just borrow more and more and more, with the eventual result that we are paying debt, not incurring reserves. So that would be what we're trying to avoid. Let me go to some raised hands because I think that was what was next here. So we have Eric, Patty, Andy, and Linda Olivier in that order. I'm going to give Eric an opportunity to chat here for a second, so feel free.
I just want, I'm not getting I will.
Sorry, Eric, you might be having an audio problem. I'm having a hard time hearing you on my end. Okay, Eric, if you get that fixed, we can move you again up onto the list. But for now, we'll move on to Patty. Patty, if you'd like to chat, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can. I turn off my mic so we don't get too much feedback. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I want to clarify a couple of things. One is that the $200 that we're paying extra now on the previous one, you say is coming off?
It's not coming off, it's just being captured into the frontage fee. So right now we have we've just counted them separately. We have your debt payment of $217 a year per parcel and $0 in frontage fees. So effectively, we've just put those together because frontage fees, as we go forward, are accounted for all capital costs, which include debt.
So does that mean that we're actually still paying for the previous system and expected then to pay for the next 50-year system too?
So I don't really understand what you mean.
Well, because we're paying for, because of what was just installed and what was left over from getting grants is now put onto us. But now we're going to go forward into paying for the next 50 years on top of that.
Yeah, so Patty, if we hadn't got that grant, everyone today would be paying $1,000 a year. And
Yeah, but that
would be debt for the system that was installed last year. So for 20 years, you'd be paying $1,000 each, and you'd be accumulating no reserve, right? So what that $217 represents is a debt payment for a system that you're currently using. And then what we're doing is we are starting to accumulate reserves to pay for future infrastructure.
right, for 50 years from now, which we don't know whether we would get a grant or not. So if we pay like too much per year, and then you find out you get a grant, but we're not going to know because we don't have any large expenses for quite a long period of time. So you will adjust every 5 years, but because we won't know for quite a period of time whether the predictions are accurate or they're not accurate, then the people, in 25-year period in a person's life, they're not likely to be in the same home. And so you're actually, I think it's kind of front loading the costs onto the people that are here now. It's what it appears to me. That's why I did vote for 2 instead of the most, because it just seems, with the uncertainty that's involved with all of this, that it doesn't seem that going for the highest amount makes that much sense, when to date most people have gotten grants on things like this.
So now let's back up a little bit here. I think it's fairly presumptuous to assume that in 50 years there will be grants available for this work. Now, part of the reason that Square Bay received a grant for the system is because the grantor, basically the British Columbian government, looked at that a lot of municipalities, many, I would say it's pretty much ubiquitous, that asset management planning did not exist in the past. So consideration for life cycle costing was not taken into account. Now the province of BC has a lot of best practices. They have the gas tax. A lot of the money that is coming in is given to promote asset management planning. They're training and developing. This is becoming a very common position in almost all municipalities and regional districts. And so one of the things we've heard from the province is that if we fail to plan for future capital expenses, you can basically assume you're not going to receive grants. You will be disqualified from future grants if you assume that money's there. Now, remember I said that the provincial law dictates that regional districts, when they provide a service, only the participants in the service can be requisitioned for funds to pay for that. That is a framework in which regional districts operate. And so currently, the $800,000 approximate grant that we received was sourced from outside the service area. That's other people that are helping fund your infrastructure that don't receive that service, right? You don't pay wastewater fees for Seashelt. You don't pay wastewater fees for Vancouver or Prince George. So I think it's a little bit presumptuous to assume those grants will be there when the province has instituted in a framework, asset management planning, that allows us to look into the future and prepare for that. That's what they're asking us to do. So that's why this is new, and I understand it's confusing, but that is part of the purpose of this.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that Prince George or any of those other places don't get grants for their wastewater treatment. And I don't begrudge them that either.
Well, from a personal level, I don't get grants for my septic tank at home.
Well, we'd all like to be on septic tanks at this point, I can tell you.
Well, unfortunately, I hear what you're saying, Patty, and I understand. I think that, there's a philosophical component to what's fair. I don't pretend to have the only answer, but what I'm presenting is what is sustainable under the provincial framework, that a service is to pay for itself. If you receive the service, you pay for itself. I'm preparing a plan that satisfies that mandate. That's my objective here. If we had started an appropriate life cycle cost and analysis in 1970 when the plant was originally built, I would imagine that these rates would be significantly lower. But we're 50 years behind the ball on this. And so we are making a catch up, and that's why all the plans have a rapid increase in the beginning. And I appreciate that this is a new thing and challenging, and we're looking for a way to kind of meet in the middle of meeting the mandate of service area paying for its own service, as well as recognizing the impact on residents. Great, we got lots of hands here. I'm gonna let the next person go. Thank you for your input, Patty, and feel free to put your hand up and we can talk more about this. I got Andy up next. Andy, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Right. Hold on, let me turn off my mic.
Yeah, can you still hear me? Oh, okay. So this evening I had 8 neighbors here on my deck listening to your presentation. And thank you for the presentation. It was very detailed. We had a very hard time understanding it. The biggest thing which I think stepped out to us is that this is a neighborhood of people who are typically between, I would say, 50 and 90 years of age. Anything after 2045, we anticipate all being either not resident here or dead. We really don't care in the slightest bit about what's happening in 2060 or 2070. That's far beyond my lifespan. What seems to me is you are trying to build a capital fund so that in 2060 or 2070, there will be enough to rebuild the entire construction. And that doesn't seem reasonable. You just said that if we should have had proper asset management in place in 1970. Well, in reality, in 1970, when people bought these lots and built houses on them, they paid for the services at that time. And we are the inheritors of those, and we are continuing to pay for them. But it seems like you're asking us to pay for the infrastructure that's required for the generation that comes in these homes after us. And we don't want to pay those things. We want to pay now for the things which will fulfill our lifetime. The people that own my house in, let's say, 2040, will expect to pay for their own infrastructure. I don't want to pay for their infrastructure. I want them to pay for that. I just want to pay for the next 20 years, which is my anticipated life. That's all. And I'd like you to reconsider your plan to do that and not to have me to pay so that there's lots of money available in 2060. I don't want to do that. I'm gone by 20 years at that stage. So maybe you can answer that.
Yeah, I think that's a common sentiment that we've received. I'll be gone in a little bit. I don't care. And I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I appreciate the sentiment. You know, when I think of that in my own context, when I bought my house, we had a house inspector come in, and they said, you know, the house is this old, the roof is this old, the septic tank's this old, and we took that into consideration when we made our offer and the price of the house. You know, I think we'd see something similar to that if a future buyer comes in and
It's non-comparable.
Yeah, but imagine you talked about the fact that you have a septic field at your home. Why should you not put money in the bank so that when you sell your house, the new owner can put in a new septic field? You wouldn't want to do that, would you? Of course you wouldn't. So why should we be paying to have a capital fund that's available in 2040 or 2060 for the new owners? We don't want to do that, and we don't think we should. So please reduce the plan, give us a plan which gives us a reasonable expenditure in our life expectancy and our ownership expectancy.
I hear what you're saying, and I'll you know, I'll take it into consideration. But the fact of the matter is, the infrastructure is what we would call intergenerational infrastructure. It exists beyond a single person's lifespan. I think it could be argued that your point of view is, you know, obviously is centered around your own personal desires and needs. I don't know if it's the most fair way to approach this, but I do appreciate that that's the way you would prefer to have it done. I don't think at this time I'm going to be able to give you an answer that satisfies what you're looking for, unfortunately, Andy. I think that, you know, when you bought your houses in 1970, you paid amount of money and to the developer. The developer built the treatment plant. They pocketed the money that they added on to the cost of the lots to make up for that difference, or, you know, something along those lines. And then 26 years later, once the system was at half the lifespan of the treatment plant, it was handed over to the SCRD. So the SCRD inherited the operation and maintenance and the management of a system that was already halfway through its lifespan. There was zero reserves, you know, built up at that time. Operational costs were considered and billed to residents. We got to the treatment plant renewal in 2019 last year, and we fortunately got a grant. If we didn't get that grant, there would be an immediate increase, you know, on every single one of your bills, and you would be, I assume there would be complaints about why wasn't there a reserve fund built up. So there's a lot of perspectives to consider. I appreciate yours, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of it. I don't have an answer at this time that will give you, you know, satisfaction. I can't say, okay, you're right, see you later. But I'll weigh that and pass it on to the board and they'll make that decision. Just so you know, I provide information. I provide these findings and feedback to the board. I don't make the decisions. I look at the factors that lead to these situations and try to analyze and provide some insight. So I'm going to move on to the next person. Thank you, Andy. We have, well, it looks like Andy got himself back in there. We got Patty up next.
Maybe I just didn't take my hand down because I didn't know I was up again.
Are you, can I lower your hand?
Yeah, but just one comment on the last thing that he said is that, or what's sort of being dismissed of it, is that, yes, we did get the grant and we're grateful for that, but that $1,000 that we might have been paying because we didn't have the reserve, well, that's not an issue because we got the grant and that's dead and gone.
Mm-hmm. So what, I mean, so let's hypothetically say we make it to 2065 and we try to sell our house and we haven't saved any reserves at that point. And the buyer looks at it and says, well, it's going to go from, you know, $300 a year to $10,000 next year. You know, that sort of, that's not fiscally responsible as someone as an organization that's responsible for managing the system. So, you know, there are, I think there's a lot of perspectives on this, and it's, it can be a visceral reaction. We can get emotional over these things, and I thank you guys for your polite discourse on this during these difficult conversations. So I appreciate that we're able to do this politely. Okay, I'm going to lower your hand, Patty.
Thank you.
I'm going to lower, Andy, you were just up, so I'm going to lower your hand too. I'm not the best at Zoom, so I apologize if I got this order wrong. It looks like Linda is up next, so go ahead, Linda.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you for organizing this. And I just would like to know, when did you make us aware that you were going to do a vote tonight?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said that during the presentation.
Oh, no, but during the presentation, but perhaps more neighbors would have joined in if they had known that there was going to be a vote tonight, which you said you were going to take the results to the board. I think that that information should have been contained in the letter you sent out to each of us. And when you're going to take a vote at a meeting, people should be aware of that. So I do not think that this should be the time that you take percentages to the board. I think that if you're going to do a vote, you're going to have to let us know so we can become a little bit more organized. And I'm very emphatic about that. This is another point, is that your 5-year rates, that's Square Bay frontage fees only from 2020 to 2025, correct?
Well, today we're talking about capital funding. Frontage fees are the...
Okay, it says Square Bay frontage fees 2020, 2025 on one of your slides that you put up.
Right through the slide.
That's what we voted on.
Okay, I'm just going to address 2 points here. First off, the vote is non-binding. There is no...
But you're taking the information gained from those percentages to the board. That's what you said.
Yeah, it's so, Patty, I appreciate, or sorry.
No, it's Linda.
I apologize. I appreciate your point here.
Okay, so I think you have to send out another letter.
Saying, ma'am?
Pardon?
I just finished what I was saying.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah. So to your first point, why did I not inform you earlier that there would be a vote during the meeting? Zoom technology has changed since the letters went out. Our capacity as a regional district as such is beyond my full understanding. And as we set up these meetings, the option to use a poll was presented to me by the IT department. I thought it was a great way to solicit a little bit additional feedback, because not everyone's comfortable typing or speaking live on camera. And so I thought, why not leverage as many possible ways to let the residents voice their opinions as possible. Second off, during the meeting, I did say this is a non-binding vote. Director Pratt is here. She's present. She's aware of the concerns that are being raised. And finally, I appreciate that not everyone's able to vote. Of the 22 people that were present during the vote, we only had 14 votes.
Okay, but you still said you were going to take that to the board. I want you to know that I will go door to door in our neighborhood with the 5-year frontage fees that you showed us, that we were told just at the last minute at this meeting, during this meeting, that we were going to vote on. And I will go door to door and see if, when the neighbors see these, that they will give you the same percentages.
Yeah, I think that'd be great if you're willing to do that, Linda. I would really appreciate it. And you can.
Okay,
me on email. if you'd like to-
Okay, so you will take that to the board, will you?
Certainly, if you provide me with, a poll that you've conducted on your own, that'd be great.
Okay, so therefore, I have to know the other question I asked you, which was for the 5-year rates, Square Bay frontage fees 2020, 2025 that we did vote on, we were asked to vote on, and the results of that you're taking to the board, not binding, of course, but it would greatly influence the way they thought the community was thinking, which plan they wanted. Now, Square Bay frontage fees, my understanding is that on top of that, there are also sewer usage fees, correct?
I don't know if you can see on your screen now, but I've put the schedule up on the screen so you can see.
Yeah, so where on this, it says frontage fees. So on my bar graphs that I took from your website under January 2020, there are also charges for, and they're pink boxes, and that has to be added onto the frontage fees, as well as garbage and water SCRD, which did increase by 70% last year in 1 year only. Is this correct? That those amounts that were in your January 2020 data are still going to be added on to all these frontage fee charges in the same amounts that were given in the January 2020 information?
So yeah, just to clarify, the first set of data we went to the public with early on was what I would consider some preliminary data. What's on your screen now, you can see has the next 5 years.
Frontage fees.
Just listen for 1 second. If you look at the far left column, the label there is user fee. It's got a little star beside it.
Yes.
So that is your projected user fee for the next from 2020 to 2025.
Sewer usage.
For sewer, that's for wastewater, but yes, correct.
Okay, so whatever is in, and then we have debt payment for 2020, and then it disappears for a while. And then we have frontage fees to be added. For example, in 2020, it would be 501 plus 718, whatever. Is that correct?
So what we have, and I apologize if this is confusing, my mistake. Your left column there is your user fee for 2020 and 2021 and beyond. This year for 2020, there is a $0 frontage fee, but
yes,
$217.42 debt payment.
Okay.
So your total right now is $718.61.
Okay.
Okay.
And that's, yeah. And then you go along and you look at the different plans. But then on top of that, you also have SCRD water and you have garbage, correct?
Yeah, I'd like to keep the topic today to the wastewater. We can get into the weeds pretty quickly here. It's already 8 o'clock and there are a lot of other people who'd like to talk.
No, but you can answer that question. There as well as user fee. And if I'm going door to door, I have to know that these are solely, the frontage fees are user fees and frontage fees only. And as well, we have to pay for water and we have to pay for garbage. Is that correct?
I assume that if you receive water service and garbage service from the Sunshine Coast Regional District.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks, Yolanda. I appreciate your comments and I'm sorry there was confusion. I think there's
the main thing was that you did a vote without telling us way beforehand that you were going to do a vote.
Well, I can assure you there was no malintent there.
No, there isn't, but it's a lack of respect.
I disagree. I've never felt that I was disrespectful, but you know what, I'll take this feedback and I'll try to be better in the future. There's 15 wastewater services and I'm juggling a lot of things. So I might have had some oversight. Maybe I shouldn't have added that poll. I apologize if I offended you. There was no offense meant. I'm going to move on to the next person here. So
Okay.
for your input, we have, looks like, oh, what have I done here? Looks like we have Gary with G and 2 R's. Go ahead, sir or ma'am.
Thank you, Kyle. I would like to review the wastewater plant for Wood Bay. Many years were spent by people in the community, including myself, to get the grant. Once we got the grant, it was never suggested that we would be paying at another length. People were told over and over again that they're paying for 20 years to make up the amount that was not brought forward because the grant was only at a certain level. And now this is brand new. A shock to everybody a short while ago was when they found out they're going to pay $5,000. Well, now we're back to a point where we're looking at $217. Well, it was supposed to be $200 a year for the next 20 years. I want to know how that is put into the figures that you have for the following years, as I, for one, will be not here in 20 years. But I don't mind paying for the first 20 years of putting on this property to keep a balance going and then go to a point, not every 5 years. Yes, you need to do expenditures and those types of things to build that part up. But as far as I'm concerned, this plant is supposed to last 50 years. And therefore, the first 20 should be looked at as a reduced amount for the people living here now. And I'll leave it at that. And I appreciate what you're trying to do. I didn't know you because you knew from when I was there, but I was at that board for 13 years and spent a lot of time on the sewer and waste management programs. Don't take your vote to the board, because what you're doing is setting up a lost cause and getting yourself into trouble. That's all I'm saying. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your input, Gary. I appreciate it. I'll move on to we got a Jerry Dunlop. Go ahead, sir. Or ma'am.
Sorry, you can hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I hate to pile on here, but I understand that you're getting a lot of flack, and I do appreciate the fact that you're prepared to sit there and accept these complaints and comments. Unfortunately, I have to reinforce what the other people have said, and I think Linda's comments were particularly valid. One of the things that I'm finding is that I was looking at the same printout of the bar graphs that were on the website, and I ended up being totally confused as well. However, having said that, I think part of the problem here is also that partially due to COVID, etc., people have not had enough information in enough time to make educated decisions. And I think your survey sort of shows that, because you only got, I can't remember what it was less than 50% of the feedback that you expected. I think you need to review this again. I voted for option 3 simply because it was the least common denominator. That was my way of saying, I think we need more discussion here.
Maybe I should have given it a no option.
Yeah. Okay, well, I didn't notice that. So that, I mean, at least I'm prepared to put it.
Just giving you one. So
my last point in all of this is, I have been involved in stratas over the last 10 years. I owned my house before that. So 2 different stratas. It didn't become an issue in the first one, but the last one I was in, we got hit with the depreciation reports, which generated a huge storm of what do we do now. I personally and some of my colleagues on strata had a lot of sleepless nights over that, because we were faced with exactly the same question as you are faced with from the people who have spoken already tonight. And that is, you cannot expect people now to pay for everything in the future. There has to be a balance there. One thing that I think gets forgotten is 10 years down the line, hopefully, the people who are participating then, whether it's because we're not around or we've moved on to a different property, they're going to be much more, hopefully, financially capable of taking on the burden of increased fees. So therefore, I think Linda's comments were quite appropriate, and I certainly will be participating in that. I really think you should reconsider some of it. I'm not sure what that means, but anyway, that's my view on it, and I appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to listen to us.
Thanks, Jerry. And I hear what you're saying. You know, I guess if we had this conversation 20 years ago, people might have said, I think people in the future should pay for it. And now here we are. But, you know, to speak to your other point about the capacity to pay for the work that needs to be done, the longer we put it off, the more of a spike it'll be in the future. However, we are, you know, one of the comments I got back in Cooper's Green, I assume that most of you were there. You're a very active community. That was a dark and rainy night in a very small and damp hall. One of the comments I got was I wasn't considering the demographic, and I appreciate that. You know, we on the Sunshine Coast, I think over 40% of our residents are older than 50 years old, and I'm getting there. So there are some things we're exploring that would allow possibly to have these capital costs that are, you know, each individual's portion of the capital cost deferred. We haven't gotten to the point where we're ready to present anything to the public or the board on that, because it is a very complicated issue. There are a lot of variables that we want to be certain of before we go forward with this. But, you know, I'd like to just at least let everyone here know, and this is something I've been saying at other meetings, is we are looking at ways for people on fixed incomes, particularly seniors who have, you know, planned the remainder of their time and they have paid for it. There might be a way to defer those taxes. So, you know, we're not just exploring this from one direction. We are looking at it in many ways. And so hopefully, you know, we'll get to a point where everyone's satisfied, but at this point, we're obviously not there. So thank you for your comments. I'm going to move on to the next person. I think I've given Patty a chance. I have Mr. Derek Neal, if you'd like to go ahead.
Can you hear me, Kyle?
Yeah, I can, sir. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very, very good. I enjoyed it. I'm at 9315 Truman Road. We've been here for 14 years, so we were really pleased to see the new treatment plant built. Just on the sentiment of, it seemed to be a little bit kind of front-end loaded here when you look at the time span involved. And just on the question of year 6, have you done a model where instead of using 2%, maybe even 2.5%, which is a kind of a modest increase, what effect that would have on the front end? Just seems to be a bit front end loaded to me.
Yeah, no, we've definitely looked at some different inflation rates. We created a little matrix to help us score these objectively. As you get a higher inflation rate, you know, you start backloading it. People in the future pay more proportionally. So 2% is kind of the balance point. We've looked at it, and it is something we've explored. There are, to answer your question, yes, I didn't present any today, but there are several models that consider a 3% inflationary rate. Yeah, ideally, what I'd like to get to is a flat rate that's the same every year, as far as, you know, the dollar value changes. So it sticks to that, the CPI. But yeah, we have considered that. So you know, with 15 wastewater systems and potentially hundreds of different possible ways to make the next 50 years work. We have to kind of thin things out before we present it all to the board, or else you can imagine they would just be swamped with technical and financial information. So, you know, if it's something that we can look at presenting to the board. I don't think it's the best way to look at it, but yeah, we have looked at it. So I don't know what else to say about that. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate your comment. Moving on, we have, I'm not sure if this is a Chris or a Chiz, and you forgot the R, but go ahead, sir or ma'am.
Hello.
Hi, it's Kish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, there is no way you can figure out.
It would-
We know. And we got the Chris every time, so that's okay. And my name is Joanna. I have a few questions, and it's just curiosity, because you mentioned a few times if we would have done this 20 or 30 years ago, something would. So I want to ask you, is this type of plant, did they exist 25 or 30 years ago?
At all. I'm sure that some people had considered life cycle costings.
No, I'm just asking from the technological point of view. Did they exist? So would have been possible 30 years ago to make a plan for 50 years?
Kyle, I can answer if you'd like.
So are you saying, like, do you mean the plant or the?
Yeah, the plant, this plant. So you said if we were doing such a plan 30 years ago, we would not, and we want to do the plan now for the next 50 years. So now I'm going 30 years back and I'm asking, would this have been possible to do? Like, were those plans, this plan that we have now, last technology, were they available 30 years ago so we could have planned for them?
Kyle, would you like me to answer?
Yeah, feel free if you'd like to.
Hi, I'm Cody Abbott, the Superintendent of Utility Operations. Yes, this type of technology existed 30 years ago. Wastewater treatment at this treatment level in Canada started probably even prior to the 50s, 40s even. The wastewater treatment plant that was at Square Bay prior to this new one was a very similar treatment process. The problem with it was at grade, and it was aged to where it needed to be replaced. It met its life cycle, its end of life. But as far as the actual treatment process steps, the plant looks very different, but the treatment process steps are very similar to what was existing there already. Now, when we say that, because I've seen some comments about, the future, what might the future plant be and the technologies, one of the things that guides us in that is, of course, when new technologies come out, there's some efficiencies with them, but also regulation. So back in the 70s, when this plant was put in, the process steps were similar, but the effluent quality might have been a little bit different. It was not as high as it is now because regulations dictated that we needed to have higher effluent quality as well. So right now, we're going to try and plan for the future and the replacement of this plant, and we're going to need similar effluent quality or better, and we're probably going to have similar process steps. And by process steps, I mean things like we're going to have a bar screen to remove solids before it goes into the biological process. And then we'll have the biological process, which we do now. And that's where you might see the tanks bubbling and stuff like that. We'll still require filtration in the future, and we'll still require some sort of disinfection to remove any fecal coliform.
So you do not, like the way the technology was moving in the last 30 years, you do not, or we do not think that things might come with better technologies and maybe cheaper?
No, they definitely will. There will be better technologies. And what usually that means is a smaller footprint. So I'm not sure if you were there when the older plant was there. The footprint of the plant was bigger. And so when technologies improve now, usually it includes a smaller footprint. And so, without getting too technical, you might have had a big open tank to try and do the biological process. Whereas now we'll have a smaller tank and maybe we'll have some, this is a newer technology, it's called an MMBR. It's where you have some floating plastic pieces that help biofilm build up so you can get a larger amount of bacteria in the smaller space. So you can effectively treat more wastewater with less space. And that's usually where the technology improves. And the reason that they do that is so that you're not spending as much money on concrete tanks. You're not spending as much money on these big filtration basins.
Well, my point is that we are trying to predict something that is going to happen in 50 years on the assumptions that still things are going to be the way we know them now, and they might not.
I can assure you that in the future, the technologies will be better, and the regulations will be stricter. Regulations never ease up. And so to put that into context, back in 2010, there was a big review done on the sewage regulation. It's called the Municipal Sewerage Regulation. That regulation was then, it's been replaced by the Municipal Wastewater Regulation, which came into effect in 2012. That regulation increased a way more strict framework for how we can operate, how we can report, what sort of technology needs to be there. Compounded by that, the Municipal Wastewater Regulation went through amendments in the last few years, which made it even more strict, and it increased fees for things like permit amendments and stuff like that. Also, on top of that, the federal government came out with a federal wastewater regulation that we must adhere to, and that regulation came into effect in 2012 as well. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to predict for the future on technology that we're not really sure what it's going to be, but that we know we're going to need it, and we know that the regulation that's going to determine what our effluent quality needs to be is going to be stricter.
Yeah, those are reflected basically in the maintenance fees, not in building the plant.
No, building the plant. So to put it in perspective, say if we were to try and build the exact same plant that was there with the exact, it would have been way more than because we had a newer technology and could go with a smaller footprint, it really reduced the cost of concrete and geotechnical type work, right?
Yeah. So it might not be as expensive as it is today. So
no, it would have been more expensive if we had to put the same technology in. So we got off kind of easy because we have a better technology that afforded us to have a smaller footprint.
And this is what's going to happen in 50 years also.
Well, we hope so. Now, as noted that the rising sea levels may become an issue, at that point when the plant needs to be replaced, you'll have a feasibility study, and it might be possible that the new plant 50 years from now cannot be built in the same spot. So it might need to be relocated.
So maybe the people that are going to be here will be more entitled to have decisions on what to do at that time. We are planning for them, which does not seem very fair for me.
No, but as Kyle said, we cannot even be considered for a grant without some sort of framework on how we will address this. You know, like if we don't have a plan, we'll never get a grant. It's like if you don't have credit, you're never getting a loan.
I'm not arguing about this. I'm just arguing at the more balanced fees that are on that we have to pay now instead of leaving it for later, for the people that are going to benefit from this.
I think I hear what you're saying. Again, we get back to a philosophical point of what's fair and what's equitable. Right now, if we take the rates that Square Bay residents are paying, and we transport them into the future dollars, and then what they'd need to pay to have the same level of service, they would need to pay a far greater amount in order of several magnitudes. So let's not look at it of the infrastructure. Let's look at it like you can flush your toilet and it works and you pay this much a year. Shouldn't the next person down the road who is able to flush their toilet and have it work pay equivalently the same amount of money as you?
Well, it depends. What happens in 20 years might be very different. The incomes of those people might be different, and so on and so forth.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of, like, we could, if you have the ability to predict the future accurately, I would love to see it, and we'll weigh it accordingly. But at this time, you know, we have to kind of look at things with the information we have on hand.
Well, that's exactly what I'm asking. We and recognize that we cannot predict the future. So let's look for the 5 or 10 years, and let's predict for these ones, not for the next 50 years. That's all I'm saying.
You know, we're advantaged in the fact that we have access to decades and decades of data. I'm not sure what your history is with purchasing, but you know, let's look at a few examples. If you purchased a house in the 1990s, what is the value now versus then? If you purchased a car in the same time frame, we could go on and on with examples. Things get more expensive. I think that what you're suggesting is that things are going to get cheaper.
What about the computers? If I was buying a computer 20 years ago, it was much more expensive than it is these days.
I think that's one example. Now there's a I forget the name of the law, but there's a law in computing that things get cheaper and faster. You know, all the data we have, I can happily send you the tables and the sources we have. Construction increases at a rate of, you know, between 3.5% to 6% annually across the last 100 years. I can't go with a speculative, perhaps maybe this is a possibility, and then make a plan. And then when we go to the higher levels of government and officials, have them say, well, how'd you get those numbers? And I say, well, that's what I feel. That is not defensible. So I appreciate what you're saying. And there is a chance you're right. If we project forward and we see that costs are dropping, we would adjust, you know, the rates accordingly. As I said earlier, reserves that are accrued within your service area are going to be used only for work within your service area. So if we get to the point where our reserves are a little bit excessive, that would be a boon to the value of the homes, because that means that the future owners have a smaller rate to pay possibly. There is no chance that money would be taken out and used to, you know, pay for someone else's garbage or wastewater or whatever. The reserves are legally locked to the service area, which is defined by the map.
So is there any investment, or do we get some?
Yeah, so we're bound by the Municipal Finance Organization. You're welcome to look that up. There's a large series of rules and policies, but you know, as a municipality, we're not able to invest in BRIX or Tesla. We invest in certified, verifiable bonds and stocks, I imagine. I'm not super familiar with the investment side of things, but I know that we have consistently over the last 20 years that we have data for beat the average rate with the investments made by the MFA. That is a large conglomerate of all municipalities within BC, so they have a lot more buying power than an individual.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I appreciate what you're saying, Chiz. And sorry, I got it wrong again, didn't I?
Joanna, it's okay.
I appreciate your point. And, you know, it is something I've thought about. And that's why I think it's important we continue to review this annually. I'll just stop. We got a few more questions coming up, and I will get to them. But I just wanted to say, you know, I reviewed a lot of information when I was doing this, and I prepared a lot. In Victoria, when they looked at a similar situation, I'm sure you're all aware, Victoria had to do a big change the way they treated wastewater recently. They had some submissions from international organizations. There's some companies in India that have some very, very interesting ways to deal with wastewater. And this isn't a problem that's restricted to the Sunshine Coast. Across Canada, we're starting to realize that infiltration of contaminants into waterways and the ocean is not a good thing long term. You know, this idea of just pushing the problem to the future is how we've gotten into a lot of situations, whether it's environmentally or financially or whatever. And so we're taking the tough decision to address these problems and make sure that we have a viable plan going forward. You know, if we do see promising technologies that are meet the provincial and the health regulations and there's ways to cut costs, 100% will do that. But the information we have now, based on everything we've seen and seen within Canada, is that things get more expensive. Things do not get cheaper, perhaps computers aside. I'll tell you for sure, my cell phone doesn't get cheaper. So we have to kind of plan for the information we have. Before I get to some more verbal questions, I've noticed that we've had a few build up in the text here, so I'll just kind of knock off this list and we can go on. We're at 8:30. Probably gonna need another glass of water here soon. So I think Joanne asked us a question before. What will happen to the funds you collect if none of this expenditure will be required? I just answered that. Reserve funds will be kept for the Square Bay service area and used only for that. Right now, we have a operating reserve that's, you know, a healthy operating reserve because we've been using the frontage fees and contributing to the operating reserve more than the capital reserve. And what you're seeing is the projected increase in user fees is being deferred or offset by some of that operating reserve. So that's monies that were put in the past, and the residents today are enjoying the utilization of those monies to reduce their rates. So I hope that answers that question, Joanne. Gary asks, we were paying 20 years for the new system. How does this fit into the new debt payment? I think that we've explained the $217 debt payment is wrapped into the frontage fee. Frontage fees accommodate all capital costs, and that's where that has gone. And that is why if you look at all the figures in the three options I presented, they end with a 17 added to what would otherwise be a round number. So Kyle, is this system we have in place right now is good for 2 meters? So a question here I'm assuming is asking, is our system good for 2.5 meters sea level rise? I believe the sea level rise we're expecting or is projected is over a longer period than the lifespan of the plant. I did not have anything to do with the design engineer of the plant, but I would assume that that was taken into consideration. If you'd like more on that, please send me an email and I'll dig up some more information. If that's something you're really curious about, I'm happy to follow up with that. I don't have an exact answer right now.
I can tell you, yes, it was, Kyle.
There you go. Cody has.
That's why you can see the man door on the side of the building is more like what you'd see in a submarine. It's a sealed locking door. Yes.
A person door, Cody, please. We have another question from Pat. It's the $1 million for 50 years treatment plant does in fact concrete building, which does not take place in 50 years of plant. I'm sorry, I don't really understand this question here. If you want to, Pat, put up your hand, we can talk about that. Maybe we should save some money for a Victoria system. Maybe. Does Victoria have a plan? I believe Victoria has a plan. If you want to go to the CRD website, it's crd.ca, that's Capital Regional District. And earlier on, I must have missed this or I wasn't ready to answer it. Lyle Wharton asked, what specific directives and assumptions have you been provided to you in your planning process? I was asked to build a capital plan for, or a full financial management plan for the 15 wastewater services in the SCRD. It's part of my directive as the asset manager. We have, looks like 4 more hands up now. We'll go to Mr. Jerry Dunlop. Go ahead, sir, or ma'am, sorry, I always assume.
Hi, you can still hear me?
And still, yep.
I just wanted to reinforce what Derek said earlier. I think he summed it up quite adequately. It seems that this plan is a bit too front-loaded for the demographic of quite a percentage of the people who live here. I mean, I don't want to go into histrionics, but I'm a senior citizen. This is I just bought this place in April, and this is my plan for retirement. I'm not poor, but I'm not rich, fixed income and all that kind of stuff. I've been where you are, and I know how you can try to predict the future based on whatever statistics you have from the past. But it's basically using a crystal ball. I think it's unrealistic to try and predict what's going to happen financially any more than 5 or 10 years down the line. So I'm basically reinforcing what other people have said. This is the whole crux of the matter. It's not what you've done and how you've done it. It's whether it works for everyone. And right now, it seems to me that most of the people in this small group are telling you, or at least the people who have chosen to participate, are telling you that it's not going to work. At least it's not going to work satisfactorily for them. So my suggestion is that if there's any way to go back to the drawing board, or limit the plan, or go with the third plan, or whatever it is, or to give us some breathing space here to reconsider what's going on, and crystallize our points of view, and give you a more objective and accurate picture of where we're coming from, then I think that would be desirable. One thing I would ask you to do, and I will ask you in an email, is to send me, if you will, the numbers that you have for the predicted expenses, and a year-by-year breakdown of, percentages of how you get there and all that and everything else, because there's something that I'd like to look at, and maybe I can jig the numbers a little bit to my own personal satisfaction, given the fact that Linda has said that she's going to do some canvassing. I think that would be some valuable information that I'd like to have. Is that possible?
So in the presentation here today, I think most of the numbers are in there, but I'd happily work with you to understand what we're working with. There's definitely, no attempt to hide anything or misrepresent it. Through the data I've said today, the construction cost index, and the only thing you're missing, I suppose, would be the specific estimated useful lives of the components and the current estimates we have. So we can definitely sidebar at a future date and go over those. I'm happy to do that. I try to avoid, and it's hard to, but there's a broad demographic and a broad point of view and understanding. So I tried to cater to an audience that would be most receptive to this. I didn't want to get too technical and too into the nitty gritty. So I appreciate that maybe you want to dig a bit more into that, and let's do that in the future.
Yeah, I guess what I'm suggesting is you presented a lot of it in graph form. The actual year-by-year breakdown of the costs and all that would be definitely an advantage. Anyway, I really do feel that you guys need to look at this again. But once more, I appreciate the fact that you've indulged us in an open conversation, and I look forward to emailing you and getting that information. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it. Mr. Wharton, if you'd like to go ahead. Maybe you stepped out away for a second. I'm going to move on.
Now I'm allowing Zoom to use my microphone.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
No, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, maybe you can answer me by phone. I don't know why. I'm not getting my audio here. But my question really is I want to understand the assumptions a little bit better in your planning model. You have basically established the basis of status quo in regard to population, technology, or at least the effects of technology, and the effect of the application of debt, perhaps. But I'm wondering what direction, in terms of government funding, that it underlies your assumption. You may be aware that the federal government, with their infrastructure plans, intends to assist rural and northern communities because of their unique inability to fund the requirements for, as what was stated earlier, increasing demands for more effective pollution controls and so on. So why isn't there a component of government debt in this, government funding in this?
Certainly. I mean, this is a question I think we've addressed a few times, but first off, we're definitely aware of the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, the Rural and Northern Community Grant. We are applying for one currently for the upcoming replacement of a component in another facility here. It's a time limited opportunity. They don't generally announce grants 20, 30, 40 years in the future. We're also applying for a grant right now for the Seashell Aquatic Center. So we're on board for grants, and where we can get additional revenue that reduces the financial impact on our residents, that's our number one. That's great. It's basically free money. Yeah, definitely on that. Why we haven't considered grants basically comes out of a conversation I've had with the Ministry of, I think it was Housing. They're one of the main grantor issuing agencies in the BC government. Through a telephone conversation and an email chain, I asked them basically what you asked me. What percentage of future funding should I consider in my models that would be available as a grant? And their answer was, Mr. Doyle, if you're to receive a grant, you are not planning to adequately fund your systems, and as such, that would be a disqualifying or a demerit against your application for grants in the future. The grants we're seeing now are largely, like you said, they're to assist rural and northern communities. That's the RNC grant. The reason why you don't see that for the metro populaces is likely because they have larger populations, more established governmental organizations, and they've been, bigger tax bases first off, but more capable of providing the planning that we're starting to get into now. A large factor in a lot of the grants that are coming out now are make-up grants for the lack of asset management planning in the past. But there's also grants that we're applying and receiving that facilitate our asset management planning through education and training and that sort of thing. And so because there is an implicit expectation that asset management practices will be implemented by the regional district. Failing to do that would be, likely viewed as a bad faith on the part of the regional district, having received money in the past and with an understanding that we would be creating these asset management plans. So to answer your question, we have been directed to not plan for grants. However, where possible, we did plan, for a little bit of debt. The reason that, and I'm sure this is something that is on a lot of minds, like the reason we didn't plan to have debt for every single future upgrade is because it doesn't work in the model. If we start accruing debt, we stop accruing reserves, and then we accrue more debt and more debt and more debt, and eventually all we're doing is paying off debt. So that's, it's not that we didn't consider it, it's just that we couldn't make it work without getting into a situation where we're spiraling out of control in debt. It's, one of the SCRD policies is that there's a limit on the amount of debt you can have compared to the value of the assets, and we have to comply with we're trying to get in a situation where we comply with those financial policies. That is the answer to why have we not considered extra governmental, higher governmental levels, BC government, federal government monies in these models. And I hope that's a satisfactory answer, Mr. Wharton.
Thank you. My audio is completely out. I'm going to look for your answer on YouTube, and you look tired, man. So I'll bow out.
It's easier than taking care of my sister, so don't worry about me. You know what? I can do a quick email to you. I have your email address here. And I'll just summarize what I said. I appreciate that you're not able to hear me. Just give me 1 second while I flag an email for Mr. Wharton. Okay, there we go. We have 3 more hands raised, and I am seeing one more question. I'm going to answer the text question since it's it's an interesting one. Can we take the plant back to private? This is something that the board asked us to explore coming out of the November 28th, 2019 Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting. We came back, I believe, on the 17th of September this year after a lot of research on this. The answer is yes, it is possible. There are several complicating factors that make this not as easy as you may think. If the plant is not managed by a local government, there are expectations that a minimum reserve balance will be held. This is one of the factors. So if this was a privately run plant, you can look this up in the Local Government Act. There would have to be on board right now a reserve balance equal to a certain calculation based on the value of the plant. So you would be legally obligated to have a plan very similar to this if this was a privately run plant. Furthermore, you would be expected to bear all costs and provide the, the maintenance and whatnot. So you would have to find someone who is capable and competent to do the work. So the answer is yes, it's not simple. We are continuing to explore this idea just so we can, have a concise answer. We've looked at it broadly for the 15 plants, but we haven't got into it specifically for any one specific one. We're waiting directive from the board for that if we want to go forward with that. Looks like someone's put their hand down, but Pat, if you want to go ahead, please do. Was this Lyle's audio before? Pat, I'll give you a minute to unmute your microphone if you like. Otherwise, we'll move on to, looks like Gary's got his hand up last. Go ahead.
Oh, come on.
I hear you now. Don't say anything you don't want on YouTube.
Okay, so you can hear me now.
I can hear you, sir. Yeah.
Okay. My question is really to do with the 50-year one. You show $1 million being spent, but that is more to do with the actual concrete work that's there. I mean, we spent that 2 years ago or last year. It was mainly the concrete. And is that something that has to be spent again in 50 years' time?
Well, again, I'm not a wastewater treatment designer, but I understand, there in human effluent, there's a lot of corrosive materials and whatnot, so your concrete can degrade. And beyond that, as we were speaking about, in 50 years, there's a real good chance that we might have to relocate the plant based on, sea level rise considerations or something otherwise. So, until we have a bit more clear directive from someone with expertise like this, obviously, preferably an engineer or a consultant, I don't want to speculate on whether the concrete's reusable or not. And we're just using, the previous cost estimate and inflating it to future values. And this isn't, it's definitely not I wouldn't say it's a super accurate way to do things. If I was putting a project out to tender, I wouldn't use this method. But it's a pretty common financial planning method to look at the previous costs and inflate it using inflation rates that are relevant to the industry. So,
okay. I
don't know if we'll use the concrete again, and if we can, we'll see a significant reduction in costs. Now, I do want to point out that in none of our plans do we have 100% financing for that treatment plant at the end of the 50-year plan. All of them require a significant portion of debt at that time. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate the question. And Gary, go ahead one last time.
Yes, I guess I'm pounding on a thing that I felt the people have been maybe not informed at SCRD, the ones that are new there. But for the new plant, it was made very clear, and there was a survey went through the community there. Are they willing to pay the $200 a year for 20 years to finish the upgrade of it? And everybody was under the impression that would be the cost. So my view is, I know you're trying to work on asset management. It was started when I was there at the RD. And basically, what I'm saying is, in your adjustment to the cost, you should take into a balance the money that these people said they would spend, and look at a longer first initial focus of the payments rather than every 5 years, and keep it down for a good 10 to 15 years. That's all I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, and we've heard this a few times, and I've definitely, I think Miss Pratt and myself and everyone involved understands that point of view, and it will be considered. However, it's just pushing these costs down the road to future owners. So I don't, personally feel like that's what a financially sustainable plan looks like. Now, to speak to your point, I believe the AAP that went out to approve the loan for the Square Bay treatment plant, I don't think there's any bait and switch or dishonesty here. That dollar value will be paid by the residents as voted upon. What we're looking to do is build reserves for future infrastructure, and this is us communicating it to you. So we've had a lot of emails. I've been out to the public several times now, and we'll continue to do this. I know we can always do things better, so I take that criticism, and we'll try to get better at this. It's been a difficult year for all of us, I think, with the pandemic and everything else. So this isn't how I would ideally be doing this. We had a plan to come out in May and have everyone sit in the Pender Harbor School and chat, but that's not allowed. So roll the punches, and we're trying to adapt and overcome as we can. But the objective here is a long-term sustainable financial plan.
Good effort.
I appreciate that, Jerry. Thank you very much.
I think it's important to note that, and Kyle had said this earlier in his presentation too, is this is not unique. It is certainly something that is happening all across Canada with infrastructure systems that are at different levels of needing to be replaced. And so as we go forward, there will be more and more competition to funding these systems and for grant applications. So it's prudent for us to be having these asset management plans and in place, which is why we are getting mandated by higher levels of government to do them, especially if we are going to be looking at grants in the future. And certainly, be advised, the board hasn't made up their mind yet. This is why we're here. Directors are here at each one of these meetings as observers and letting staff take the lead and really listen to everything that everyone is saying. So all the points are noted and they are being heard. And certainly the conversation is not ending here. Kyle's had the contact details up. We still welcome more comments in, and please talk with your neighbors. And if you have, thoughts or even maybe other ideas that you think that we haven't considered, I don't know, Kyle might hit me later for saying that, but there are certain things, and this is why we asked staff and Kyle to really, spearhead this, and why you have Cody here too as a technical expert. It's a complicated process. We want to make sure that everybody understands the implications, not just now, but into the future, whether it's a future that you're going to be here for, or grandchildren, or somebody else that you've sold your home to, or the next 3 people after that. This is something that it is an asset, so it's a public asset, so we need to look after it as public. So thank you everyone for being here. This was a great turnout for tonight, and Kyle will be having it. Kyle will explain where else you can access more information. I'll mute myself now, Kyle.
Okay, yeah, we're still here, and there's still 12 of the residents here. So if there's any more questions or comments, please let's do it now. Otherwise, I know it is late. It's Friday night. I'm sure we're all as eager as I am to slip into our pajamas and go to bed. If you have any more comments or questions, you can get a hold of us via email. That's info@scrd.ca is the best way. And it will get to me and I will respond to you. I took time this week and I've responded to a few emails, and I'm happy to do that where I have time. We are getting into budget season, so the time is slowly evaporating, it seems. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. And if I don't see any more raised hands or questions the next little bit, I will be closing down everything here and looking forward to some emails in my inbox in the future. I'll give you guys a minute in case there's anyone frantically typing away. It takes me forever to find the right keys. Otherwise, I'll say goodbye in a minute here. I'm just going to finish this email to Lyle so you can hear the question by text. Thank you everyone for coming. It looks like everyone's filtering out. Again, thank you for all your comments and criticisms. I appreciate it. It's great to have everyone out here tonight. Great turnout.